the biggest issue is when you're actually going to like the window that they have for you to actually register to vote is shrinking. So they're trying to decrease that, whereas it used to be you could register up to like 6 months, 15. Like they're gonna cut it off. Like there are specific dates that they don't want you to.
Yeah, that's exactly how Obama actually solidified his presidency.
Okay.
You know, it was through early decision voting,
Gotcha.
and that's what they're actually targeting. They started targeting early decision.
So voting earlier, like
it's a multi-pronged as far as, in a sense, wave of laws being passed around. You know, and even Republican Bev Perdue, she said it on the Carolina. She basically stated that it's kind of like neocentric segregation idea. You know, she basically said that at some point in time in history, or not African Americans, people in general are being prohibited from the natural American right of voting.
The impoverished.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, and I think that in today's context, we should be more about increasing voting. We should be about spreading information, educating people how to vote, and bringing people to the polls rather than trying to restrict them.
You know, the most ironic thing about like voter fraud is that it occurs on generally two more giant levels. One, the multi-billion-dollar corporations that actually count the ballots. They usually have software glitches that can go in favor of Republican or Democrat, and theoretically those have popped up within state and presidential elections. And then the actual recount, like we saw with Gore v. Bush, where it's actual political conscience getting in the way of the natural political process.
Matter of fact, the whole campaign seems entirely politically motivated, as far as having interest, whereas they saw a grassroots movement actually happening with the diverse election, people going to the polls, and they're trying to kill the grass. And it seems like they're trying to actually disenfranchise.
Well, it's funny if you really think about it, like the percentage of people that don't vote to the percentage that do. The percentage that do is a minority, and so that's why in every election there's a potential for really huge change. You know, if it wasn't Obama to galvanize those people that weren't going to vote, you know, if it was just a regular run-of-the-mill John Kerry or Al Gore again, how many people would not have turned out to vote?
Well,
you know what I mean? Yeah, it seems like every election there's that possibility.
So true. I think the reality of the situation now is that even the Republican, they lost the Hispanic vote, and the Hispanic vote is really, really critical when it comes to these elections. I mean, the 2010 census reported a 56% growth, and it's more where they lost it with all these legislature concerning immigration and trying to have a hardline perspective on securing the border and appeasing to, you know, the American white, you know, conservative. They've lost that Hispanic
Whereas
vote.
wealthy diplomats can come here and have diplomatic immunity.
I mean, or even more so, they can have these wealthy tax cuts at the top, you know, corporation, and ship all these jobs overseas, 1 million jobs to China.
That's the biggest
thing. And we're all talking about unemployment, and nobody's concerned about the issues.
Protecting the borders, but not protecting borders for money.
Or international interests, more so. Rather than being concerned with things that end home. So I think that.
But that's the rhetoric they're using is national security, the war on terrorism, you know, war on drugs.
So true. I mean, when you see talking heads on the media, you hear the sensationalism that just happens with arguments, and people lose sight of the idea. Like even with a lot of ideas, what are the platforms of these people? People aren't even checking out the platforms, or I mean, it's millions of our taxpayers' dollars are going towards restricting and having all these provisions about voter ID laws, but these are millions of dollars that can be allocated for a different purpose. You know.
So let's say theoretically there's 100% voting every election. There's the whole that votes is 100%. Okay?
Wow.
Well, I'm just saying, not out of the whole society, but we'll just say, okay, these people that voted, that's 100%. Of that 100%, 25 are Republican, 25 are Democrat. Okay, within the other 50%. Within that microcosm are either going to be independent or people who don't vote ever and don't care. So that's who you're trying to galvanize. So that independent can be roughly 25 to 40%. And then the others who don't are the rest. And so the Republican can always secure his election hopes in preventing the early voting.
So true.
Because the Republican is always, they're watching their Fox News. They're reading the Wall Street Journal. They're protecting their financial investments, so they're always up to date on the political process. Whereas the average Democratic voter, perhaps they have 4 kids and it's a single mother, or perhaps they just work for the state and they don't get compensation that you would get in a private entity. Either way.
Well, I mean, I think that it's more so. If you look at the states in a pinpoint view, a lot of these states are just battling grounds, and they're just margin voting. So the idea is that you have about 270 electoral votes, and I think about 63% of them, you know, are basically in jeopardy. Once you secure those 63%, you already had that presidential campaign. So what it is more of where they saw what happened with 2008 election. It was a diversified election. So many people actually came up and voted. It was just more of where, okay, the formula for power has actually shifted in America to the point where people are starting to realize that it's really a numbers game. Everything at this point is about numbers.
Like Moneyball.
It's exactly what it is.
But for politics,
it's all numbers. You know, I mean, whether it's good enough money to win a campaign, it doesn't even matter what your political platform is. It's just that if you're able to execute things properly, you have somebody leading behind you. It's just not.
And perhaps that's why Obama's the furthest thing from a socialist, was because he turned down the campaign finance reform initiatives. He turned down state money. The first president to turn down federal funds for his election, because he's the first president to be in the $1 billion in raising for his next election. You know, I mean, maybe not the first, but certainly the wealthiest president so far. You know, especially in terms of his election expenditure. Not just his first one, but his re-election committee now. You know, so
it's just, to me, it's just what I'm curious about is that, and the reality of the situation is that some places that they don't even have driver's license centers, you know, and people rely on public transportation to obtain these free IDs if they
here in
obtain
Tallahassee,
that, and they'd just rather not vote.
If you live in Gadsden County, what public transportation do you have to vote anywhere?
So true. I think that, you know, a lot of these technical issues on, you know, a legislative level, or what they're doing is they're prohibiting, and they're in a sense making people discouraged from voting. It's just the reality of the situation. When people see a series of processes of what you have to do to go and actually vote, you know, rather than seeing it as a natural right, sometimes people see it as an obligation in some senses, and people just, okay, my vote don't matter. And all you need is enough of those people, enough people to have that kind of mentality to kind of give way to the, you know, the voice of the people being expressed.
But how does that happen?
Well, it happens, you know, naturally, depending on your situation. I think that, you know, if you don't have a car, you know, if you don't have a job, you know, you don't have food, according to your Maslow's laws of physical needs, you know, you're not concerned about, you know, other things. You're worried about surviving. You're worried about providing that bottom pyramid.
And
you're
that
about
includes
getting food, water,
being
getting shelter.
aware.
Yeah, I mean, even political consciousness is not an argument when you're fighting for certain things. And it's kind of sad because in America, regardless of what you have, your freedom of choice, your individual liberty is the most quintessentially American idea aspect at all.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs with political consciousness. That's a very
I mean,
eye-opening juxtaposition.
Really,
I never thought.
I mean, there's more of whether we get to that point of social consciousness to where we're concerned about seeking praise or whatever we're doing, we're concerned about living and surviving. And the reality is that poverty is very real in America. And you know, I mean, the reality of the situation is that we have the highest distribution of unequal distribution of wealth in America, and there's just, we have the destitute poor, and
the rich versus the rest.
Exactly, it's exactly what it is. And I think that we do have, they're still voters. You know, they're still counted as a full person, and to disenfranchise them is not only unfair, it's inappropriate.
Well, it might be the most American thing that's continuing.
I mean.
Unfortunately. Unfortunately.